Welcome to Carolina Sculpture Studio. My name is Clint Button, and I'm a granite sculptor. Welcome to video number 210 of the Virtual Stone Carving Apprenticeship. Now we've basically got her composed and located and scaled to approximate size. The head's still a little big, okay? Needs to reduce, okay? Hold off on that. Just wait, okay? This is when you've got to, it's kind of, you do this in sort of a back and forth fashion where you may move around a lot. And when I'm doing a lot over a big area, it makes a lot more sense to wear a mask because you don't keep moving your suction everywhere all the time. It just isn't as feasible. But then you're going to have areas that you focus on. Put the suction right there, you carve, and the mask. It's still good to have it, but it's not as critical. You know, I mean, I'm sure I've got dust. You know, I've done this for a long time, and it's just the way it is. But, and masks weren't seen as a big deal, you know, 20, 30 years ago, you know, like they are now. So, then after you get her composed, you have to go through and work on specific areas. Once you get the bulk of the stone off, you work on specific areas because I'm trying to bring her down to size, okay, so she doesn't look like she's, you know, bigger than me, you know, I'm not a little skinny dude. So I want to thin her up. We got to work on making sure that this is committed, okay? Her right thigh and knee are committed to coming out. We don't want her to look too knock-kneed with the knee too far inside. We want it to be, you know, some, but not enough to make it look like she's in an awkward position. And so we can't move the knee. You know, this lower part, this is pretty committed. But our hips are still big. So as we put a little bit of material sink here in these folds to represent where her actual hip is, that has to translate up into her torso because that line is going to be reasonably straight. You know, you could have a little different one way or the other. It's better to have the hip bigger than up here because that's what makes her look bulky. We want her to look slender so that she goes straight up, hip straight up through her torso. And so this will dictate the line up through to where her shoulder is, her armpit and everything. We've got a little bit more material here to take off. We also push this back some and we work the shoulder. I haven't really done anything to the shoulder since the last video, but I'm balancing this out. The hair's really big, that's got to go away a lot. Better to do that at the end so that everything agrees really well. But right now, I'm going to move the camera and try to explain what I'm doing because as I'm working her blouse fabric, you know, back and working with her sash that wraps her stomach and her abdomen, that all impacts how this works. And so I want to move the camera a little bit closer and try to explain, okay? So give me a second. As I'm working her, can't really see here. I've taken off most of the material around this point, and so if I smooth it right up, I could have that point, you know, right perfect on the surface. But I want to leave some material around it and this other foundation point. So I still have our 3 points for the pointing machine if I want to check this against the plaster. But for the most part, the plaster has served its purpose and it's done. We've also got a couple other points. There's one here for when we swung compasses for her waistline. Okay, and that, because there's a sash there, that's a little arbitrary. As long as we're close, they're not as critical. But as I reduce this, I almost cut some stone off here. And I may still, but I really don't want to do a lot of that until I start developing her arm. I want to put her arm together and work her arm from the shoulder down to the top of the die because that's the real hat trick of this whole project is to make sure that her arm laying that flower on top of this die is like right on the money. That's my ultimate goal with this, is I want this arm and that flower to be perfect. Okay, that's where I'm going with this. So, but as I'm cutting this, her hand has been, it's had good volume up to this point, but it's been tight. It hasn't had the volume that I really want. What's going to happen as I lower the material around here, her hand is going to come forward simply because everything around it is reducing, okay? And it's important, you know, as you do this, and I talk about not surrendering volume, the more you do this, the more you'll understand how you'll capture volume like that, how this hand will come forward as this is pushed back, and that gives you the chance to flex her hand, or flex her fingers a little bit and make it look like she's just touching her chest and not mushing it, okay? Because that's not what we want, okay? Even if the fingers are together. So this is slowly going back. Leave the end of the fingers fat. Leave them connected, leave them in stone. You're going to break those. Those will get bumped and knock off, and the fingertips are really bad about that. And it'll be a lot easier to put some detail for her cuticles on here when there's mass. We can walk that back, and then we can trim the ends of the fingers off at the very end, and they'll be as sound as possible while we're working. But I'm going back with, you know, with chisels and bushing tools, 9 points, and even actual bush chisels and two blade. This cuff, this interior edge of the cuff, has to justify with the top of her wrist. And as we push this back, it gives us a little bit more room here for the cuff. But right now, this makes it easy to see. This cuff goes up through here, and see that edge is way up there, and that's, you know, 1/2 an inch, 5/8 of an inch over from where it really needs to be. And it's doubtful that the cuff tips that much behind her wrist where we can't see it. It's more likely that it's pendant, and so it's going to be just about completely parallel, in phase, in plane with this. It's going to be over in this area, okay? But just pushing it back isn't great. So, doing the same thing I keep doing. I want to approach that line. I'm going to bevel this off at a 45, and then I'm going to work it back, and I'm going to keep it. I'm going to do that to preserve that edge and keep it sharp, because we don't want a failure here. At the same time, as I'm pushing this back, I've got a bunch of volume here that will do good things for me. And I'll see if it looks any different with the light turned on. You can't really see it. I think it looks just as good with the light on. But you can see that this comes down and then it curves out. I've got an extra amount of extra blousing of the fabric. You know, that's why I call it a blouse, because it's fabric that blouses. You have to make a decision with your sash detail, whether you did it on the model or whatever, where it's going to be proud, like it's going to wrap and capture her fabric on her lower part of her drapery, okay? That goes down over her groin and down her legs and everything. The sash is going to capture that, so it's going to be on top. But here, you've got to decide if you want that fabric to be tucked tight into that fabric, into that sash, or if you want the sash to be capturing it and the blouse is still loose and it has some fabric to drape over. And so that's why I'm leaving this volume here. I'm cutting this so it can have a little bit of a hump as it goes in and captures, and to insinuate that this hard edge that's up behind here, where you can't see it, the fabric is actually laying on the horizontal part of the sash, okay? You may have already thought of that, I realize, but it's good to say it. But working this back, I'll go close to this, but it won't be perfectly in line with the outer cuff. We've got to both work this cuff edge back, and we've got to sink it to match the fabric here, because the fabric is going to push it together. It's not just going to be a big wide open cuff like it's the hand sticking out. And you see that on jobs, and I don't know, I don't like it as much. I think it's more contrived than real, because when you're carving this for something that's, you know, just one of the icons, you carve it down and there's a fold in the corner, and there's a fold in the corner, and there's a flat bottom on it. It comes down, it goes straight across, and it goes back up, and then there's a specific line in each corner. And that's just part of the genre. This is supposed to be a little more lifelike than straightforward genre. So, and I'll trim this bottom and make all this work. I don't want to cut this fabric, this volume off yet. I want to get the cuff all together in this fold to make it look good, and then I'll balance the rest of this sleeve, because right now this is a little proud. I want to make sure all of my folds have a reason to be there. They have tension that makes sense when you look at it. You know, this should pull. Where is this going to pull? It's going to pull from up here by a wrist. This is a fold that hangs down, so they're going to capture, and they'll have an intersection here where that stress or that tension marries, and that goes down to the bottom of the cup. And you just have to, you can fold fabric up to see how it looks, and some of it's contrived, but you don't want it to look obvious. So, but I'm going to keep working in here, pushing this back. I'll tip this at a 45, and then I'll cut off to it. And as that migrates that way, it'll change a lot of this volume. As this push back, it'll bring the hand up, and at the end, I'll measure. I'll keep my, like I'd said before, I'll keep my straight edge, take advantage of my reference material here, and check my depths on each side of this element that divides her chest into two areas, okay? Because this bisects the area. You got one area here and one area here, and it's really critical that they are at the same level, the same depth or height or whatever you want to call it, where it goes under her arm and comes out of her arm, because you'll see a lot of carvings that aren't justified, that aren't finished like that, and there'll be something that just looks weird, you just don't understand it, and for some reason this will be skewed and it will be a lot different in height than this will. It doesn't look like it's one piece. Like if you took her hand off, it would just be the front of her chest. There would be a step in there, or they would go over and there would be a big turn, or it would twist like this. So it's really critical to make sure that, like, these two portions of her chest, take your straight edge, one way or the other. Use the back. If you don't have a reference from the front like this, you can use the back, and check your depths at the same approximate position on each side of the right or left to make sure that it matches. And if you haven't done that and there's a problem and you can't figure out why it looks weird and you keep chasing it, something looks weird, a lot of times that visual noise, your eyes will see it. Your eyes are a lot smarter than you are. Your eyes will see it, but they won't be able to explain it to you, okay? Same thing with having facial features that are crooked. They may be crooked up and down, they may be crooked in and out, okay? So that's why one of the reasons I'm not carving the face now too. I want to make sure I really got it nailed down, because we're not doing a perfect portrait copied off the model. We're doing a general likeness. And that means it's going to be direct carved, so it's got to be right on the money. All right, I'm going to go back and keep working this, develop this fold, and as I push this, especially this lower portion, as I sink it, it's going to make this pop a lot more, and it'll make her give her arm a lot more volume. So I'll be back in it, but we don't want to chip it. We got to be really careful doing this, because if we have a loss on this, it could be a really bad problem. Okay, be back in a little bit. All right, I've taken some material off I moved the edge of this cuff back. It was approximately right here. So I moved it, you know, not quite half an inch, fat quarter inch, 3/8. And I started taking off some material here. As you address all the little things that don't make sense, and you slowly get one thing cleaned up, and then the next thing cleaned up, and the next thing cleaned up, it really begins to transform the job. And that's part of what I was trying to make a point that you don't. Be really careful about carving everything all the way all at once, and doing something and absolutely finishing it, because it's got to be perfect. And a lot of times you'll have to move it just a tiny bit just to make everything really line up well. But as you start taking this apart, like there was a block of stone here that still had the center line, that was the face of the stone. I left it as reference. I'm okay without it now. So I cut that off all the way down to the bottom, and that's going to allow me to carry this line up, smooth this off, and have the sash. And that's going to help her look taller, because it's going to make this a little bit longer. There's going to be less bulk here that's confusing you as a viewer. And my goal with this part of the cuff, right here on this edge, it needs to justify well. They'll stay out of the way. This edge of the cuff needs to justify well. As you're cutting it, it's going to look like there's not enough room between the front and the back piece of fabric, okay, of drapery, for that to be over an arm. But it's important to remember, this arm is not straight across, okay? This is high and this is low. It tips and goes in like this. So when you cut this, after I cut this fold here, the edge of this cuff, I get this all perfect and I start to open it up. This inner edge will be cut to match the angle of the arm. It'll be tipped back, and that it'll pick up at at least 1/8 of an inch of width between these two pieces of fabric, these two pieces of drapery. And that's really significant in terms of how it creates shadow and how it directs light, so you recognize that that cuff is not flat, but it's angled a little bit. And I don't know if it's hard to see, but it'll tip in. Instead of being cut flat, it'll tip and it'll go in. That's exaggerated, but it'll tip in some. That'll make this look wider, thicker, and it'll direct the eye as to how things are moving. And when you're working on a small bow relief, the little things like that really matter, because you've got a limited amount. The smaller the relief is, the less stone you're taking off, the less opportunity you have to convince the viewer of what they're looking at. I don't know, that's because you're making a fake. You're not making. It's not a real person living, breathing. It's not a flower. It's not a bear. Not any of that stuff. It's just this. It's a piece of stone. Okay, it's always a piece of stone. But you want them to see it and recognize something else in it. And so when you start doing things like tipping that edge, I'll take a round chisel, that's not a round. I'll take a small round chisel, something that fits, like this one, and I'll go in here and I'll cut a little scotia on that. It'll be just enough to make it look right. And then the back side of the scotia will be squared off, and then the inside of this will be cut back, and then it'll be worked around so they meet. And because you don't have to drill this way deep in here trying to prove something, because it'll break. But little things like that, as we start tipping, we're going to find all kinds of, it'll make the volume, it'll make it look very different. Just like having this small undulation of fabric blouse to go into the top of her sash is going to help. So I can't do a lot here until I really put this arm together. I need to figure out that arm and where it's going to be and how how much it's going to extend that way versus being straight to the front. So I've got to have this arm looking great so I can take it, dimensionally match, use it as a guide to produce this arm so she looks good. Okay. But yeah, just a little bit. I can't really take pictures all along. Sometimes you can take a picture and then you come back with a picture a little while later, you see a difference, like a time lapse kind of thing where you have a slideshow. This just happens too fast. But this is looking really great. And I got a little more to tune up here, and that's going to clean that arm up a lot and really make her look right. Her chest looks really good right now. And I got to start. I'll finish trimming this off here. I got to start laying out the folds of this sash to make that look good, because that will dictate how. I've got to do one or the other. This is done. This can sink some more, and then I got to get the sash, because the fabric has to go into the sash, and you got to just pick one or the other. So we're finally into cold weather, and I usually don't wear a glove. Sometimes I do. Usually when I wear a glove, it's because I'm cold. And so wearing a solid leather glove blocks a lot of exhaust air off of one of these hand machines. It makes it a lot more comfortable to work with. Whether you clip the fingers off or they're worn through or not, makes a big difference. Okay, back to work. Take a look at some of what I got done. Keep working on that arm, really trying to just focus on it and the drapery, and it seems to be coming pretty well. This is natural light. Let's see what happens if I turn the light on. I don't know if you can see. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Have to be careful about the bottom because we haven't defined the end yet, so we can't cut this V all the way down and then have the most desirable result. So this is fat right now. Did cut this off. I haven't taken that little chunk out, but that helps with her waistband quite a bit. Trying to leave, if you can see, the waistband is convex at this point. It's tall, which is what I want, because I want to have some volume behind here in her stomach and her abdomen. Her blouse drapery here looking really good. I've been able to, as I'm getting her hip resolved and it goes straight up, and it works really well with her chest. Been able to take some off here to push this back so that this drops a little bit, because this should be lower. This is still high here compared to this. I need to go back a little bit. This is really big. An easy way to look at where the stone is on her versus, let's see if we can move this, versus that is that all of this is going to be back near behind her, where her ear would be, behind her jawline. Her jawline goes up here, and then her ear. And so this is still got to go back, a fair amount, because these are, I tried to make sure they weren't low, that they weren't too deep. I think they're still tall. That was part of the aggravation of pointing from flat. This one I think is pretty accurate because I measured from the background. These are all tall. So there's still a lot of material to come off here, because that's all supposed to be back in this area compared to the plaster. If you look, you can see where the feathers are. But I do have this. I got to make sure I've got a nice plane here. I still got to take this back to basically where this beveled line is. And there's a bevel all the way up, and that line's pretty straight. I got to flatten that off into the wing. So at some point I'll just have to start tuning that, and I may wait. I probably will wait till I lay the stone down to do the other finish work, because it's just so much easier to deal with it when it's laying flat. But it flows really well. I did take off more material here, push this back where it was already going, and trying to keep this straightened up. It's still got a little bit of fastening here. I got to go in and scrape it. but this has changed the way her chest looks a lot. She's not as big, strong as she was as we narrow her up. This is a major visual noise issue right here. This has to go in because this doesn't fit. This still flares out, and so it needs to go in to define her midsection much better. And as I clean this up, we got a point right here and a point right here and a point right here. As I clean this up and get that tuned up, it'll give me a little bit of access to sit here and work up over my head and be unhappy and all that stuff. You're going to have working out of position situations, but you've got to get used to it. But yeah, and that hand, the arm, see if I can grab a broom here. You can see where this arm, well, now you can't see because of the compensation. Before I cut this back, when this was out where this point is, all of this was out to here, and her arm was like a paddle, and that's not good. But see, as I've developed the rest of the form so everything matches, I picked up 3/4 of an inch of depth on this arm, over 1/2 inch, 3/4 in some places. And it makes her hand look better. See, I hate the auto balance on this light, on this camera, because you try to show something and it doesn't show. I do want to turn this more as I develop the drapery. I'll make this drapery go in a little bit so that this curves over. It's real common to see stuff end like that, and some people don't care. I don't like it. I want it to look more realistic. This isn't foreshortened that much. So, but her volume's really great. So, if I can not trip over stuff. So I'm probably pretty close to wrapping this video up. I think it'll be a little short, but I think this is a good spot. So we'll put it together, and like I said, it's really tempting to go in and work on her face and her head and make her pretty now. Don't do it. Just wait. Get everything else straightened out, make her look real, and then put a face on it, because you'll have a better understanding of where she's looking, what she's looking at, how it works, just everything. And the big important part, I'm trying to wrap that one arm up, this arm, so I can start composing this other arm to make it just fantastic. And we'll have to work that and then develop this die up, and that's part of why I haven't cut that top off, because her elbow is going to be about here and her hands are going to be in this area. Well, I guess it's sure. If her elbow is even with this one, it's going to be about here. And then if it drops from her elbow, the top of the die, if the elbow's in this area to match this other arm, you got here, and then you've got her arm dropping down, and so it's going to be in this area. And see, that's a couple inches taller than the die where I've got it drawn per the model. But remember, we gained a full inch here in the bottom. We made her taller because we could, because the stone's bigger. And so we're trying not to waste stone, because people want to see big. They don't want to see little. It doesn't matter how perfect they are. Everybody asks, what's the biggest thing you've ever carved? Or are you working on anything big right now? They don't care. You do a little job that's so technically over their head, they just couldn't comprehend it if you spent a day explaining to them, and all they want to know is how big the stone was. So we're making this just a little bit bigger, simply because the stone came in oversized, and I got to cut the stone off anyway, and I'd rather carve it than just throw it in the ditch. So we made her an inch taller. We'll make the wings a couple inches taller than that, up above that red line, that bottom red line right here. We got this much this line here, we got this much extra material, so pick it up on both sides, make those wingtips taller. Should look great. Okay? But if you've got a job like this that you're working on that takes time, you've got to get accustomed to it. If you have this sitting in the studio where you can see it out of your peripheral vision, especially if it's a full round job, you will think that it's a real person. And you just assume that it will because you can sort of sense that something's there that's shaped like a person. And you, what'll happen is you'll get used to it. And then all of a sudden somebody that is a real person will walk in and stand there and they'll be looking at it, and all of a sudden you'll see this real person there and you'll jump, and I mean you can startle enough that you'll drop tools, and that's, you got to be careful. So it's a really, I don't know, it's a hard sensation to explain. After you've done it a few times, you had some life-size jobs, and you understand that you got to put them somewhere where they're not going to be in your peripheral vision when you're working, because they can be really disconcerting. So, and we're something that's smaller scale, like those two, they're not going to affect anything. All right. My name's Clint Button. I'm a granite sculptor here at Carolina Sculpture Studio with the Virtual Stone Carving Apprenticeship. Thanks for coming in.